Nice solid 45 minutes. That'll be fun.
Okay, I am live now.
Good. Are you?
I'm
Am I?
pinging
Am I
you.
live? Am I live right now?
Yes.
Well,
So
hello, Lucy Stream.
hello. Although no one's here yet. It's like it's a Lucy stream. It's not one of those big, popular, successful people streams when the stream starts and it's like, oh, there are 50 people already here watching. You know.
Do you want me to post in Lucy Stream in Sunday's Obiters, or do you want to?
Maybe you should. It would be you had more clout.
All right, we'll see. I'm not sure that's the case, but I appreciate the compliments.
I'm good with those. I have a silver tongue.
Yeah. All right. Well, there's six
See,
people here. It's three
Oren.
people here. See, there's a couple people here.
Oren joined. Hello, Oren. Yes, clout. Clout and silver tongued compliments. Also, I'm gonna fix my hair. If you could introduce yourself to the audience. Hold on.
Mm-hmm.
Let me see.
And boom.
Oh, you've posted?
Yes.
Yes. Hello, convenient Estelle.
Estelle. Always happy to have people. Always happy to see Estelle. Estelle pops up everywhere. It's great. All right, so Lucy, are we going to do this thing?
Yes, we are going to do this thing and even more things.
Even more things. All right. So I'm going to list out games. Here's a game or two that I think are worth playing. That uh, you wanted me to talk about horror, and here's for me the things that sort of play into what makes a horror game.
Yes.
I actually think horror is not the genre aesthetic that it is in the same way in film, for example. Film,
Yeah.
the genre that's a genre movie. Um, Plays a lot with aesthetic and it plays into these things in a very basic setup. I
Yeah.
think games, because we are the vehicle, because we are the thing playing, when we talk about horror, when we talk about uncertainty, when we talk about existential issues, whatever it may be, weird, that stuff, there's, to me, a wider range of games that people do not consider normally when thinking of horror. They put Resident Evil, for example.
Yes.
Fantastic game, not fighting that. Fatal Frame, one of my favorites of all time.
Yes.
These are horror games. But then there's like games that I think play with that genre thing and really mess with it in a way that I think is, as I was telling you, that I consider to be important. Uh, and one of those would be Ice Pick Lodge's Knock Knock. It's not for everybody. Knock Knock is a very odd game. It's 100% in what we might call the general horror genre. It is a 2D game, which I think is far more difficult to do horror in, but it's also not doing normal things. Ice Pick Lodge, as a company, doesn't do normal things. This is the team behind Pathologic. If you
Right.
haven't played Pathologic or Pathologic 2,
No,
should.
unfortunately.
Oh, Pathologic should then be probably top of your list. Pathologic 2 should be top of your list. It's one of the more extraordinary, like, existentially horrific games that's there.
I played this game. I'm not sure if you'd see it as horror. It was on the Nintendo Wii. It was
Mm-hmm.
about this boy who lived alone in a place and the whole world was depopulated and was sort of implied that everybody just died out of somewhere and the entire world was there was this sense of loneliness, of this sort of somber nostalgia, and then the character sort of finds out that there is someone out there who's still alive and walks through the desolated empty world, and you can interact with objects and they trigger sort of memories of those who have used them. Would you pile that
I'm
into
not
the
familiar with that game.
I can't remember the title right now, but would you consider it in any? There's this sense of sort of uneasiness and tension.
Well, that unease and tension is the thing for me that makes what I would say kind of this odd specific type of horror game. Because games where you kind of know you're going to be scared. Let's talk about like Resident Evil.
Yeah.
Resident Evil is a game where we know dogs are coming at us, zombies are coming at us,
Yeah.
evil things that are going to kill us. Got to make ammo. Like all the stuff you kind of know. The
Although,
only unease is really jump scares as a thing.
yeah, although Resident Evil also is like the majority of the game is this a little bit tense atmosphere, but going through this specific atmosphere of quietly going through locations, library rooms, reading files, and
And unease, uncertainty, I
yeah,
think
and
is one of
the
those things where it's like I don't know what's happening or how a thing's happening, how it's going to impact me.
yeah,
And this is where Ice Pick Lodge, I think, are kind of masters of this. They did this incredibly strange game called Cargo: The Quest for Gravity, which is a kind of like a Kerbal Space Program if you took a lot of LSD.
oh,
And um, it's hard, I don't know how else to describe it. There are tiny little 2 foot tall round men that you can kick who have rainbows coming out of their ass,
oh my
and
gosh,
it's a
what?
really strange game. Again, 100% worth playing. They did The Void, which I think is a far more artistic sort of semi, again, unease, surreal horror, maybe not, but it touches into, if it was a film, it would be considered on that side of things. It'd be in the very, very artistic side
Right,
of things.
but
Do not get me wrong.
I think that Resident Evil is mostly puzzles, reading, and atmosphere because enemies
Yeah.
outside of bosses, technically speaking, you're supposed to avoid most of them. There's just obstacles that you run around. Basically, you're not even supposed to shoot at them for the most part, ideally speaking.
Well, and this is like the thing I really like about what Ice Pick Lodge did with Knock Knock is playing with hiding as a mechanic and how it works, playing with the idea of losing your sanity because that you just need to make it through the night. Nothing kills you, but slowly things get really strange. You have
Oh,
to keep you're in a house that is slowly like shit's going missing, things are breaking, rooms are changing, and it's incredibly unstable in terms of like an actual narrative structure or anything. It's just unstable, and you need
right.
to make your way through the game. Incredibly well done all the way through. These guys are again masters of this. Ice Pick Lodge's Pathologic is in one of the best ever, but this stuff, Knock Knock, what they did, I think is deeply, deeply, deeply underrated, which is a shame. Um, it's a big shame, to put it very, very lightly.
I've just been given a
Um,
title to that game. I'm gonna check if it works out. Um, to that game about the person that's alone in the world, and I'm gonna check if the title that someone just gave me bears out. But continue talking.
yeah. So there would be that. That would be, I would consider one of my important horror games that sort of plays in that. Another one would be Capsule. And Capsule is an older game done by an incredibly talented dev, Adam Saltzman, who, for those of us who've been around for a long time in gaming,
Right.
one of the first forever runners. He's actually the guy who kind of created the big one that went everywhere. But Capsule specifically, it's not again what people would traditionally call horror. It is a minimalist survival game, but it was a thing that for a small period of time was a fad that I wish really went somewhere. And it was called an interface game.
Oh,
And the idea was that you weren't actually anything in the world except you're looking at a screen in this game Capsule. You're looking at the computer screen in the
right.
capsule.
Huh.
That's the entire thing. The audio is exceptional for this. It's a very small capsule. You feel it in your ears, to say the least. You
Yeah.
feel it in your ears. You feel the noises outside, and you are looking at the radar. And so as you travel and you run into stuff or anything, you will hear it, as if you are inside of a small human-sized capsule going forward,
Oh,
like you're laying down face down.
okay. So I
And
found
it's
the person who told the title was correct. Would you like to see that game?
yeah, sure.
All right, I'm gonna show it to you via screen sharing, the secret method. Thank you, Cal, for Iron Lung. Are you talking about Iron Lung?
No, capsule.
Okay, so let me try to show you the game without showing you any of my secret folders.
Okay. Yeah, I'll send you a link for capsule. It is a incredibly simplistic game. Like it's minimalist, and I'm a big fan of people who really go to this crazy length where it's just kind of square pixels on a screen, yet somehow builds into something much more as you play. It's really, really smart. Highly, highly recommended. One of my
Okay,
favorites
so how do
of that
I?
genre. No, just play it on your stream. I got your stream up. Just play it on your stream. You're good.
Oh yeah, just play it on my stream.
Yeah, yeah, you're good.
Yeah, I don't have to share it with you via Discord.
Nope.
Oh, okay. Hold on. Hello? You're still
Hello.
here, right? Okay.
Oh yeah.
All right. So I'm gonna show it on stream, and you're gonna tell me what you think. I'm gonna press play now. If you'd recall, if you'd consider it in any way part of the.
I'd have to play, but again, it is that kind of thing I'm talking about. So yeah.
Let's move it a bit forward.
I also have other video up in other windows looking at it.
Buried him. Truly alone.
I always love not knowing a game. It's not a thing
In the
that happens
world.
often.
I was truly alone in the world. And you sort of walk around the building alone as this guy. There's a pretty.
Maybe I'll find something he left behind. It's so dark I can hardly see. If I crank open the dome, then I can let in some moonlight.
So it's got a pretty clever. It really used the Wiimote, huh?
Yeah. Some
Man.
people say that Resident Evil 4
On the
was
Wii
better.
is the best. It is. I have the chainsaw controller for it, which
Because
is
of the Wii.
yeah, because you can actually like drive it in. It's the stupidest thing, but it's so fun. And the specifically the sniping segments with the rifle are so much better with the motion controls. Just very, very tight.
I think actually with Resident Evil 7, the VR worked pretty well, at least in my opinion.
Yeah, I think for the most part it was more
look.
gimmicky than anything. But
It's-
yeah, I think it
his
still is better
flashlight.
without the VR.
You liked it better without the VR?
Oh yeah.
I actually like the VR. I like aiming the gun with my head. And I like that
Yeah.
you could look into the drawers, you know? And that's side
Yeah.
windows.
All that stuff's fun. But there was no use to it.
I mean, it's sort of, I don't know. It makes it more fun, no? That's the use.
Well, it does. It does if you're excited about VR. And that's and we can get into this discussion another time or in how if you want. But that's one of the great challenges of VR is that it is primarily a gimmick. And so when when the gimmick is active and people are interested, it works really well.
I thought they were all dead, but I see at least one survived.
Yeah, the gameplay of this looks really great.
Who's there?
I
skipped ahead.
like this
Sorry.
game. But I haven't gotten far in it. But when it comes to VR, there are certain uses that you can do beyond gimmicks, no? You can use it in puzzles, like...
It is ultimately like as a thing of a free moving camera. And it's really weird to say it like that, but that's kind of the best way to describe it. It's a free moving camera you can place yourself. And then the controllers, if you're able to have them, again, depth of field, movement of hands, all great, but now you're constrained in a different way.
Yeah.
So when you build for VR, it needs to be really for VR, which of course is a challenge when literally VR is basically a dead art and there's no people buying anything in it. So it
Yeah.
becomes a big challenge, to say the
Unfortunately,
least.
I don't know. I'd like to see the technology develop.
Me too. I have to a point. Um, I'm also kind of glad to see it kind of go away for a while because the archetypical VR games and what VR turned into, I just am really just deeply disappointed in. Big problem happened when early on in the life cycle of the Oculus, everyone was excited and people were building like, oh, how are we going to do this in VR or do that? And Bethesda and a handful of other companies came out with effectively porting their games into VR.
Yes.
People wanted it, they said,
Yes.
everyone was excited. So we got Fallout, we got Oblivion and Doom, and a bunch of these games sold.
Yes.
The problem is that became the way design-wise we would consider having people work in VR, where it's like swinging a sword is just moving your hand, which is garbage. Well,
There
you
were
just all of these.
some-
Go ahead.
There are some pretty, at least I've been shown some pretty nice platforming games that sort of utilize the VR in pretty nice ways, I thought, when I played them.
I don't know that. I mean, again, you're talking to someone who I built things in VR. I won Tribeca, I won Sundance Film Festivals with my VR piece. I know the art form and I do love it, but I don't love what kind of it is because of the way people build. People build very quickly. They build for lowest common denominator. So you have things like the number one game is Beat Saber until it's monkeys climbing. And all these games are cute and fun, but the challenge becomes that the people who like buy those kinds of games, they buy them for one use with a handful of friends, and then it goes in the closet. No one's building content that is repeatable, is long lasting. The
Right.
closest you get is something like Cloudhead Games, who made one of my favorites in VR, which is a kind of a John Wick meets Crypt of the Necrodancer shooting game where you actually are shooting to the beat and killing guys on beat, and it's an amazing workout, but it's a really fun ongoing thing. It's a really wonderful setup. They're great devs too, really good people over there. But like that stuff has some legs, but not enough.
Right.
And so how do you build for VR? Well, you run into this other challenge, which is the reality of VR is that you can't move. You have to have,
Yes.
you literally move. You have to actually move your body. If you haven't, a really fun thing to do, if you have a VR headset in any way, is to go out on a soccer field. And you can even do this now, but you go on like a soccer field or a big field and you make a big area. And so you can fully run around a big space. We did a handful of big space tests. I was part of the team at Star VR. So we had like incredible tracking, huge setups, the ability to really wander around and do things. It was kind of incredible. And the challenge became like, you have to do that. No one has that. I used to make
True.
this joke that like VR is the white bougie American dream because it requires that you have a room dedicated to it. And I'm not
Although-
sure how many people have a room dedicated to a
VR.
thing.
Well, technically speaking, you would have those public avenues that you'd visit that would have dedicated rooms, and then you'd be able
wow.
to.
I was one of the founders of IMAX VR. Yeah.
Right.
But even that, you get fucked in because everything runs, everything's a business, and so you have the same problem as movie theaters. What is your price per square foot, and how much revenue are you making per square foot? And when you have people renting for $15 or $10 an hour, like this is the challenge. So people rent for $15 or $10 an hour, and your space costs X dollars per hour to just own. What do you do? How do you handle that? because
Yes.
most people show up at the same hour in the same 20 minutes even, and then the rest of the day you don't have any customers. So how do you do it?
Yeah.
And again, it creates specific kind of content that works in a very specific way.
You've been criticized. What's this guy on about? You don't need like a room dedicated to VR. You just need like a bedroom where you put the trackers in the corner. But I think it has
Yeah, trackers that can see the floor. In a bedroom, do you have a bed in your bedroom? Or are you on your bed and now we know exactly what you're using VR for?
that is a pretty big limitation when you actually want to wander around the room.
Yeah. Just make sure you remember exactly where the bed is, and that
True.
make sure the game you need is like exactly able to use the 2.5 feet by 10 feet space that you've given it, because you know your bed's there, so you can only walk so far.
But usually it's usually not just the bed in the bedroom. You usually have a desk, a few chairs
Oh,
or something.
and again, I have my office, I have my VR setup in, and I'm like I set this up, but again, anywhere else in the world, Americans are very odd. We're very fortunate in a lot of ways, but like the idea that people in China have the ability to have an entire room free of furniture, or at least
Right.
just say a 15 by 15 space free of furniture, it's not a thing. That's not a fucking thing that happens very often. And
Yeah.
it's very wealthy maybe, but it's not a thing. And you see this also in actually much of Europe. It's a really specific use case, and people can use it while they're sitting. Sure, people can use it at the TV like PlayStation VR 2.
Yeah.
Sure, they can, but no one wants to. Sorry, apologies. 5 meters by 5 meters. Apologies, Estelle. 15 feet. I'm apologizing. That's terrible of me to use the.
True.
Hey, what
Feels
can I
like you
say? I prefer to have everything measured by king's thumbs.
listen. It feels like you got a foot fetish when you say in feet.
Yeah, VR is a fascinating thing. And what's this guy on about? I can send you my fucking resume. This is a thing I really, really know. Really, really know. So feel free. We can do that game anytime.
Nice. That is nice. I unfortunately don't have the VR, but we could dive into the subject because I'm interested in it. But today is
Well,
the horror. The
well,
horror.
it's a fascinating space, and it's really what it's come down to is Mark Zuckerberg. Everyone's like thinks that he's very excited about the potential of VR. He's not. Doesn't give a fuck about VR. What he sees the potential of specifically is the data collection that VR does and AR does inside of people's homes that then can be used secondarily to create advertisements and information that can be sold to advertisers.
Right.
And he's spot on, by the way.
One interesting sort of use for VR that I thought was really interesting was that you could watch a movie with a VR set, and it would create the illusion that you're watching a much bigger screen set than you actually are.
There's some truth to this. So this is where you start getting into the challenge of pixels per degrees, which is what VR is ultimately about.
Yeah.
So when you exist in the real world, you have your eye can only take in so much specific data when you're looking at
Yes,
things.
yes, that's why you focus on usually on one thing,
Yeah,
and all
right.
the other things are blurred out, sort of.
And so, in theory, your eyes have a certain amount of information per cone, per rod, that can be sort of directed at a certain number of light beams.
Yeah,
A VR headset very often is going to be 250 to 300 pixels per degrees. Really, really dense screens that are that amount.
yeah,
Watching a movie on a big screen sort of gives you some of this room where you're like, hey, I'm watching and there's calculators online if you want to go look at it. It's really fascinating. I'm watching a big giant screen at a movie theater. How much of that screen is actually my field of view?
you usually have to sort of. Mm,
You kind of have to turn your head sometimes,
yes,
depending on
yes,
where you're
yes.
sitting. Often you have to kind of look around a little bit on bigger screens, but sometimes you're in the back of the theater and you're looking at a screen that's ultimately the same size as a 20-inch TV if you were 2 feet away, right? So
Mhm.
it's kind of this back and forth. It's kind of fascinating. So I think one of the challenges becomes with the headsets, you need an extraordinarily high pixels per degrees in order to actually replicate the resolution and experience of sitting in a theater.
Yeah.
Now, the Apple headset does this. I will say the Apple headset does this. Avatar and Avatar 2 in the Apple headset is a genuinely mind-blowing experience. It's the only thing I will say is a mind-blowing experience about the Apple headset, but it is. It's not worth $3,000 to see
Oh
a
my God.
mediocre movie.
$3,000. That's basically a lot of my debt that I have.
I think it might be cheaper now. I think it's on sale. It doesn't matter. It's not very good. There's not a lot of other use cases. But watching Avatar is insane on it because the incredibly high pixel per degrees, the incredibly good color space that it has, the way that the screen sort of handles 3D, and also the transfer they did, which was incredibly expensive and very particular to only the Apple headset. All of those things make it pretty incredible. However, it is still not the same as sitting at a movie theater where where the entirety of the experience is itself different. I was building an app at one point to sort of play into this idea of how do we replicate, and this is a long-standing VR question. How do we replicate the feeling of being in a crowd? Because in VR digitally, it is more like being in a chat room, like your chat here, or it's because you're alongside people, but you're not really alongside people because you don't even know if they see you or if they give a fuck or anything. And you're also only getting this very particular image of them. You're not getting the energy. If you've ever been in a concert, for example, at like, I used to go to Rage Against the Machine concerts, for example, Insane Clown Posse shows at whatever, Red Rocks. I grew up in Denver, so Red Rocks for everything was fucking wild. But the energy you get by being in a crowd is unfucking real. And it's true at political rallies. It's true any crowd. There's an energy that somehow begins to form. You feel it.
Yeah, but then you
I've
have to
never
sort of
experienced it in VR.
That's
Never.
because you feel sort of at the end of the day you feel like detached, right? You feel like you're outside of it. You'd have to replicate somehow the physical feeling of being in that space. That is
Yeah,
probably why you still feel detached at the end of the day.
you do because it ends up. And there's a great book on this by Byung-Chul Han. I can send you the PDF. I recommend it all the time. It's his book, In the Swarm.
Yeah, because like in real life we can feel ourselves being in the space.
And it's In the Swarm goes through a handful of things, but one of my favorite stories he tells is of this old horse in Germany, Hans. Hans, in the early 1900s, was a horse that could count and do math. And it blew everyone's mind that this horse could count and do math. And so people would pay for tickets, come from all over the world to see this horse. And the guy owning the horse would go in not English, but Hans, what is 2 + 7? And Hans would stamp his foot 9 times and then stop. And everyone would be like, what the fuck? How the fuck does he know this? And so this went on for a long time. I don't think the guy was a shyster. I think he genuinely thought this happened.
Right.
As Byung-Chul Han tells the story, they ended up calling in a bunch of scientists, and one person who came along was actually a philosophy professor, and he answered. He said, "Oh, because everyone's he's doing this. It's this. The scientists made controls and they put in audience members only they knew, so that way they could tell it wasn't anyone cheating, and still the horse could count." And the philosopher's like, "Well, that's because it's none of those things. Actually, it's nothing." And everyone's like, "What?" He's like, right before Hans is about to like make one more, like when he's at that end, everyone goes silent. Everyone goes silent because they're waiting to see if is it. And then, so the horse
Okay.
knows to stop then.
Right. Yes. So 2 + 1 is 3. That's 3, and everybody gives the horse a signal to stop. Basically, at that point.
And no one knows it. No one knew it. But
Yeah.
there is this thing that happens that we have forgotten in the digital space of
But
all of the signals we don't know that we're giving.
Then I guess the question is, what gave the horse a signal to even start stomping?
Well,
What was the
he
exact
got it.
trigger?
He would feed it. He would feed it to start, and then
Okay.
basically
Okay.
it's worth reading. I sent you the PDF. But what he's going on about there, why Hunt brings this up, and I love it, is we forget in the real world all of the signals that we are not aware of,
Yes.
both that we're giving off and but also that we are receiving.
That is.
And it's things we don't want to talk about generally. So when I say, like, when I'm talking with someone, the multiple types of smells that I get from them, because we all smell in various ways, whether it's our
Yes.
breath, our clothing,
Yes.
farts, whatever it is, the moldy food we ate, anything, those signals mixed with the light noises a body's giving, how someone is slightly moving, how their shoulder slightly edges, and like things we don't think about, the
And
billions of signals,
that is
all
sort
of
of
that is
like,
gone. It's
yeah.
gone digitally. Like
That
right now, you
is,
and I have voice, and that's it.
yeah. But that is also why, like, that is sort of the source of the uncanny valley effect, right? When we see something that's supposed to be realistic, but it feels off because there, for
Because it's not
example,
as
there's
complex
so
as it should
many
be.
micro expressions that we do that those representations of realism just don't have, and that is why to our eyes it just looks off, it looks weird, hence the uncanny valley, right?
Yep, spot on. And so we have this when we do stuff in these spaces that are social. It's one of the reasons that VR's like metaverse and the metaverse as a concept really never took off, is because it's not a replacement for the real world in any capacity. Because it basically distills all of our interactions down to only a handful of very intentional, specific things that we have total control over. And at that point, it's artificial in a way that it's hard to even describe what artificial means.
Yeah.
Because even artificial sweeteners have parts that we aren't certain of, or things that are in there that are
Although
like in millions of
there's
percentages.
this weird other side to this, right? Because we have the uncanny valley sort of feeling when we have the realism, but on the other hand, we have this sort of, it works sort of both ways, strangely enough, that if we intentionally simplify things, then suddenly this uncanny valley feeling goes away completely, and the thing suddenly feels actually quite natural and pleasing to us. Like that's how hand-drawn animation works, for example, right?
Yep.
And
Yes.
there's this effect. I've noticed it when playing MMORPGs like Final Fantasy 14, where people are not really meant to be put inside. People are not meant to be like, because it doesn't use VR, it doesn't use anything like that. They're not supposed to feel like they're inside a crowd, but they still, there's this simplification here at work that people still sort of create whole communities inside the game, sort of do form these crowds, so to speak, that they take part in events in.
Well, this is Sartre, who I tend to recommend people read. Sartre's pretty much, I want to say, lovely. His book Critique of Dialectical Reason, I think, really goes into kind of what you're describing here, and does so in a really amazing way. He talks about basically the group or the collective, and he does this by talking about the series of people. And
Right.
it's a fun sort of way to sort of think about a group is someone who all together at once are involved in a moment or in a thing
Yeah.
or current whatever. But a series, I have, for example, played Resident Evil and liked it. So have you. So has someone else. A series is us passing through an event and then relating that back to each other. And so we have this really interesting sort of thing where we comprehend this moment that we've kind of reduced life to. We've then claimed that we've shared this. And through that moment, which is in the past, not real, not experienced, we now attach our own meaning to each other through this
Yeah.
thing, which is a fucking problem. Because that's basically, if, through Nietzsche, we can just start looking at exactly how that makes us instantly impotent. Because now all we're doing is talking about the past, an unchangeable thing, and this series of things that we're relating to each other. It's not a thing we can do. It's not a thing we can enact. And in very, very specific amounts, the groups born of series themselves serialize themselves again. So ultimately, the kind of groups that come of this have absolutely no ability to do any real meaningful political action at all.
Sort of. Well, I don't know, because it feels like when you know how there are places, for example, where um, I'm not sure if it's meaningful when it comes to life changing or even reality changing political movements, but I think that groups gathering in this sort of virtual space and sort of, for example, creating an LGBT related event, like a pride event, is sort of meaningful, I guess, to people that live in a country that does not allow for such a thing to even happen in real life.
Well, and now you get to the interesting questions, because I know exactly what you're talking about. The one beautiful thing that the digital world does is it collapses all space. So that way people who normally would be alone or wouldn't be able to voice what they feel or how they feel about themselves, not only feel comfortable to do in various spaces, but find other people who also do. So you find trans people in Poland. You find people who are non-binary in Moscow. You find people who are a polyamorous queer couple in Japan that suddenly have commonality and are able to have a conversation and go, oh, fuck, I'm not alone. Oh, this is good. What can we, like, this positive.
Yeah.
However, there's the other half, and this is the part that's, if everyone were together, like actually in a real space, like everyone got together at the local bar. There was when I was in San Francisco, there was this fantastic queer bar nearby that like was wonderful, amazing coffee as well. And you'd go in and the energy was very odd because it was not like an online space. It was safe. It was great. But people would talk about, well, so here's the problems I'm having. Here's what I'm doing. And people would actually engage in a really particular, well, look, I've got this thing here. I can help this way. I can do this. We could go talk to these people. Here's this. Here's like, it's a much more direct, immediate thing. Online, the ways we're able to engage are literally limited only to what has been written to be allowed for us. The way code works is you
Yeah.
can do only things within that code as it's designed. You can
Yes.
place only certain things. You're not able to do other stuff. In a place in person, I could take a big black Sharpie and start drawing on the walls. I can't do that in any of the spaces we're in. I can't right now start drawing a map on the walls or making obscene art or anything. Like I'm limited. And
Yes.
so you have this the series group that's created, and I'm not saying it's not positive. Nothing is good or bad only. There's positives and negatives. We get to find people like you and I would not have connected without the internet. I think is a
Yes.
very safe bet.
Yes.
So that thing is cool. However, what did we connect over? Sort of through Sunday and also kind of liking video games and caring about sort of lefty-ish politics and my mistakes about saying how I feel about Russia, I think is where we first really talked and connected.
Yes, our
but-
debate that
but-
happened mainly in private.
And all that's great. And all of those are like positive in themselves. But the connections themselves are tenuous at best. This is not me saying I don't care about you. I do. You probably care about me to a point. It's great. But it's not the same as if we were in person, where we could
No.
literally emotionally be supporting. And so it gives us, and this is the great dichotomy that the internet's brought, is it gives us spaces to belong that naturally make us impotent politically. And
Although I feel
It's
like
not-
there can be this interplay between these two worlds, so to speak. You can meet a person, you can meet them in the context of the internet space, but then you decide to connect with them in real life, and then you build something in real life alongside still
well, you hope
continuing
so.
the online thing.
You hope so. But my experience is that the vast majority of times that someone meets from an online space where you've built a relationship, one of the weird things we do as people is we build the rest of the person, like just naturally, whatever else the rest is. I've watched your videos, sure. But as far as like general behaviors or how you treat a person in person or how you talk, I have no idea. We've never sat down and had coffee. Like, how the fuck would I know what you're like to have coffee with? but I've kind of built the rest of you. Most of us do this. We build the rest of the person. And then when that person doesn't meet expectations, or when we have expectations, it's a sideways move where we're like, oh, and so what happens? Well, we kind of disengage from the relationship.
Well,
It
it's sort
changes,
of
it shifts.
like from my personal experience, when I had the occasion to meet people that I've met online, and there was some sort of um, uh, thing happening outside of the online. My attitude is that I try to meet people where they are as people, and if they show um, side of themselves that they don't, for example, usually show online, or they, for example, there are tough moments that usually, like, you don't usually showcase your tough moments in online, in an online space, when they might get angry or stuff like that. And that becomes sort of like a choice, if you want to sort of interact with the person as they are, or do you want to, as you said, construct an image that you want them to be.
I think I'm not going to disagree with any of this. I think generally we're in agreement. The challenge for me becomes that second bit, because if we can figure out a way to actually transfer those series groups, which are created on internet spaces, away from being what they become, which is reactionary and paranoiac by definition. If we could move away from that and find a more universal way to get people to gather or deal with each other, suddenly we actually might have something. But I don't see this as a potential within the way, not just how the current internet is structured, because it's structured ultimately towards a very, very specific capitalist direction. But I think just generally how interaction is done online, in the way that code is written and how these things come to be, where we lose all context of any interaction. And I tend to be someone who I want to have more radical discussions of things where, people in every angle hate a lot of the things I would ask about. Things like, can we do a way of doing some kind of proof that I know there's only one of you, that you aren't, as much as I know, I know people in your chat, for example. I've talked to a
Right.
handful of them, but I don't know all of them.
Like, what do you mean that there are not 3 people running the same account, for example, and
Yeah,
every time
exactly.
you talk to a different person?
Yeah. It's one of the great challenges of the internet space is the anonymization and the lack of knowledge that you're not dealing with one organism. You're dealing with a question mark. You don't know if it's 1 or 10 or if it's 500 people, because, by the way, it's a thing. People trade accounts, and you never really know because they like the anonymization of it. So how do we allow ourselves to have a more reliable online experience where we can put a little bit more vulnerability of ourselves out there? Not false vulnerability, which I think is very apt, but instead actually be in a position to actually share ourselves more.
Right. Although when it comes to, when you, at least in, I would say that in private settings, when you talk to a person, you sort of at some point start recognizing, even in text, you do start recognizing certain speech patterns, and it would be a pretty big endeavor for 3, 4, 5 people to sort of just replicate the exact same of phrasing, everything, and formulating thoughts about things, etc. Right?
Mhm. Well, and it's again, all of these things create a very particular way of viewing the world, which is ultimately where the trouble begins, because as our image of thought, the way thought itself operates and sees itself, when we start having it conditioned in this very particular way of viewing things, not in terms of events, but in terms of like people, in terms of individuals that we're defining as we go, in terms of very discrete categories and hierarchies, which is how online is built very much. This puts us in that position in the rest of our life that
Can you
creates,
elaborate
again,
the categories and
well, simply put, when I'm in a Discord, uh, am I talking to a person? When I meet somebody, how they look and what they do, it's not about necessarily, because again, I am a gender abolitionist. I don't believe in any of these things as categories. The question for me would be, if I first engage someone, I engage them as they are. And as they are is far more complex than
Then what you see.
femme, male. It is far more complex than queer or straight. It is far more complex than race. It is far more complex than anything.
Yes, it's like
Humans
a
are
combination of all these things and more.
well, and these things are actually the most boring part, because in reality, none of us are any one of these things. We're kind
Yeah.
of a mix of a lot of different stuff,
Yes.
and we poke out in certain ways that society has deemed we have to be called.
And
So
even
my
those
question,
singular categories have a lot of different things packed into them, sort of.
Mhm. well,
It's
and
like,
well, and this is it's exactly it's all of these things are multifaceted. So the moment I assign a category, I've not only limited you, but I've limited my interactions with you.
yeah,
It's one of the reasons I don't believe in categories. But online, if I see you on Discord, I am seeing a particular categorization that you've put forward as the one you want best to be dealt with as that thing. And that's fine. I'm not like going to fight that. But now I'm dealing with you first as those handful of categories rather than the complex reality of the person underneath. We start from there.
yeah.
And that is where and why I think the anonymous side of the internet, the total anonymization, where people don't give any of those things. It's old internet forums, old 4chan, old Twitter, where it was like things were just eliminated. People weren't using voice. People weren't doing any of these things. There's a thing that is exciting about that, because I'm just being dealt with by what I say or what I'm doing, and I build my personality over time from this pseudonymic perspective. People like that. I get the feeling there. But in the real world, we kind of get to do that too. And so we have this very particular category building thing from the start that happens. I find it very frustrating. And from there, we then find ourselves, oh, you're not allowed to say this, you are allowed to say that, because of the category that you've been placed in a very particular way.
Can you give
And
me an
suddenly,
example of the not being able to say something or being able to say something?
FD Signifier, any video he's ever put out.
Can you elaborate?
As a white people aren't allowed to talk about certain things, flat
Okay.
out. He says
Because
this.
of the category that they are placed in as white people.
Correct. And there's an old Doug Stanhope joke that I've always liked, where he's like, he says, how does he put it? I want to make sure I get it right, because it's horrifying, but it's accurate. Is you don't. I can tell you right now, as a white guy, that you don't understand how racist people are, because I hear the stuff they say when you leave the room. And that, I think, is when we start, because that's a real thing, by the way. It's a good line, but it's a real thing. If we can't have open conversations about these things from whatever perspective we're at, knowing the perspective, because again, these things are intended to be lenses for ourselves and others to critique and grow.
Yes.
But if we can't all of us talk about these things, now we're building from category to other category. And we are, again, the series group creation rather than the emergent group creation.
Of course, the one thing that I would sort of place as a, I don't know. I mean, I am sort of creating a category if you think about it in a certain way, but I would still say that if you want to engage in a subject and talk about it, you don't have to know everything right off the bat, but you should at least want to learn about it.
Well, but this would be because I'm not disagreeing, but let's talk about, for example, trans issues, which
Right.
is one that I think is a really good case study of how I would want to talk about these things.
Yeah.
A straight cis guy comes along, has never experienced trans issues, and he's going to explain to you trans stuff. Now, one, you're not going to stop him, but two, what he's really doing is he's actually explaining his experience of trans issues, but he's doing it
Yeah.
uncritically. And if you understand his position, and this would be what intersectionality and critical theory is meant to do, if you understand his position, he's actually speaking an extraordinary amount of truth about the way sexuality is defined for him and in this world that is affecting everyone else. Now, for him to come and say what other people's experiences are, he can eat a dick, fuck right off. Like no one wants that fucking guy around. But that's across the board. The same would be true of trans people who say mine is like sort of a cis presenting complex weird thing, like that thing. Allow people their experiences, but we can't because the category comes first, and this is the
I guess
challenge of these things.
I don't know. I think it sort of comes down also to the attitude of people involved. Like
Oh, for sure.
like I think if I talk to a cis white cis person, I don't know, cis person, right? And they
Mhm.
want to discuss trans topics with me, I don't see an issue. I don't see their
Well,
perspective
I know
as
you
less
don't.
valuable as
We're having, because people are valuable to you. And again, but you are, we'll just say unique. And I think people in your audience are going to be unique. One of the challenges is looking out at the rest of everything and how people are formed by the swarm. And it's again why I
right.
recommend Byung-Chul's book, because the forming of the swarm, how people become the swarm and how we deal with it is very different than how we deal with things in the real world, how we are formed by the real world and how it builds us. And that's, I think you and I are talking not necessarily as critiquing each other, but
Right.
the way that the internet is structured and is built is the challenge for me. And I see this kind of across the board as we get into, any uncomfortable subject. And there's a
Yeah.
lot of very
I just
uncomfortable
sort of
subjects for
don't see
people.
it as helpful for me. Like, let's say we'd want to discuss trans topic right now, right?
Sure.
It would not be very helpful for me to say, well, you're cis, so you're not able to get it or discuss it in any meaningful way. I didn't even. Useful
No, it's
is
not
not even
helpful.
helpful is not
That's
even the right
exactly my
word.
point.
I just don't think it's true. you
Well,
know?
no, but useful is actually a good word for it because even from a cynical perspective, it's not good. Like
Yeah,
it's not good from like a kindness and treating someone else as a human perspective, which is to me ultimately what trans rights is all about. Is like,
yeah. But I
hey,
also
we're all
think
formed how we're formed, be how we're going to be. But I think a lot of people, because the first thing we do is we are put in categories, and this is the real world works this way for sure, and worked
yeah,
this way I think a lot more in the old days for me than it does now. And I
just
think in a lot of places now it's still the case. But that the internet is like built now from the ground up for this, I find to
yeah.
be one of the more troubling things that came about.
I just
I would
sort
have
of
much rather, because we ended up in this weird place where like we seem to have more real people on the internet, yet all of them are more polished and fake than ever. Whereas if we had, for example, like not far from Korea's system, where people are linked to a very particular ID, but we don't know what that ID is. We just know that person's unique.
hmm,
But if everything was anonymous, we'd probably have a much better internet.
right. But going
It's a
back to
weird,
this,
thing.
just mm, I had a thought. I just think that it's not. I thought I had a great thought to share about the whole. Oh yes, I just don't think people need to have the exact same experience to be able to sort of share experiences and common ground, if that makes sense. Because it leads to a very frustrating for me situation in which, um, for example, speaking of trans issues, people that identify as non-binary are excluded by people that consider themselves binary, quote unquote, and they
Yes.
will say, your experience is not the same as mine. You're not able to get my experience of getting through million medical hoops to do this, and therefore you're cheapening my movement by not getting. And I think that's ridiculous.
Well, there's a line in Anti-Oedipus, Deleuze and Guattari's work that I do readings of weekly. It's like one of my favorite books of all time. But he has this line in there that you'll find really taken in some very interesting directions, where he says that all of us are transsexual. Now, it's really doesn't mean that every man reading it is actually a woman or every woman reading it is a man. What they mean is very specifically that we are like trans in the sense of like between both. That the reality is none of us are Like there isn't like pure masculine guy. There isn't pure feminine woman. There's no such thing as that. That people are these like mixes of these things. And the again, reality of what we are in the world is that we are trans.
Complex.
And I've always liked that thought. Marcel Proust, I think, ahead of his time, a unique man. But he made a comment. God, this was in like, I want to say, this was early 1900s. I almost don't want to repeat it because it's so horrifying. But he talked about, he's like, he's noticed amongst straight men, because he was, rumors are he was not one of those. He's like, I've noticed among straight men
Not straight.
that actually, he was not straight. Or maybe was. He was a unique guy. But he talks about how, amongst men, straight men, he's noticed that there's a variety of men having a type of woman, and that if you relate the features of the women they like back to men, you can actually start to see that there's some men who are straight through being gay with women. And he had this long thing he wrote about it. It's in Letters to My Neighbor, a collection of his writings. And it's deeply like frustrating to read if you read it as if it was written today, but it's
Right.
a fascinating look for something like 120 years ago in Europe, which was not a time for him
Although,
to be
of
like
course,
about this stuff.
of course, the existence of trans people um, throw the whole idea of sort of sexuality and sexual preference into a bit of a loop, right?
Well, and that's kind of where he kind of ends up, which is really fascinating because he kind of talks about how there are women who present more as men. There's women who don't have the normal curves, and
Right.
some men prefer that. But
Like,
is that because the men
for-
are those
I mean,
men?
for
Like
s-
it's really
for
fascinating.
some people, it becomes a really big question. Like, for example, take me, trans woman. If I sleep with a man, what is it? Straight, gay, which is it?
Well, and it's
People will, like, many different people will answer in many different ways, I think.
well, and it problematizes the very conception of what straight and gay mean, and
Yeah,
ultimately,
but we
and that,
like we sort
which
of
I'm
have like a
glad because I
broader
don't
idea.
like the distinction because it's one of those things where it's like I don't know any guy who's straight who will sleep with any woman, and I don't know any guy who's gay who
Yeah,
will sleep with
that's
any
true.
man.
But
Like
there's this
that's not how it works.
There's this concept of, and I've heard it a lot, genital preference, being attracted to certain secondary sexual characteristics like vaginas or penises, etc. Right? A
Right.
person will. I have a preference. I'm not attracted to this or that, etc. You know?
I actually can kind of, again, sexuality and attraction is such a weird thing that I don't think we even come close to really a grasp of. I think the more that we start getting into that granular and molecular, I think the more real we are when it comes to what we're really attracted to. And I don't even know if it's really dicks or vaginas. I think
Yeah.
there's a such thing as a really feminine dick and a really masculine vagina.
Right.
And
But
there's guys who are into the really masculine vaginas, and there's
yeah.
women who are into really feminine dicks. So like
But then
these
again,
things
it's
exist.
it get also complicated, I guess, because
Oh
you
yeah.
may think you're not into this sort of thing on a physical level, but then emotions come into play. And it turns out that with this particular person, you're perfectly attracted to this particular thing that you thought you weren't.
It's really a fascinating space, and my favorite thing about it is actually because I've got two kids, and we're not raising them gendered, or at least we weren't. It's one of the more weird things because I am normally just a person, so there's only so much we can do. I made the comment I think the other day where like I was talking about how I realized early on that I was being much more gentle with my daughter than my son, and that wasn't a thing like I was thinking about. It was just sort of built in. Like it's just
Right.
inbuilt into the way you are. It's a lot of stuff when you're a parent you don't realize is built in. One time we were at dinner and my son was like, he took a bite that was tiny and he's like, "Can I have ice cream now?" And I said, "No, you need to finish your plate completely." without missing a beat, I looked at my wife and said, "Why the fuck did I say that?" Like, because it's not what I think. It's not how I feel.
Right.
Like it was this immediate reaction, and when you have kids, it comes out really hard. But with Dexter, my son, he's 7 now. We didn't do that. He wanted to grow his hair long. People would call him, say he was a pretty girl, and he wore tutus and dress, like all that shit. Didn't bother me. Loved it. Whatever he wanted to do. And then at one time he was like 5, and he looked at me. It was surreal because he was like, "That woman, she called me a girl. I think I'm a boy." And I was like, "Okay," and that was it. And I was like, "Wait, what the fuck?" It's this really surreal moment. Like,
Yeah, of sort
uh,
of
oh
deciding
shit,
your
this
identity.
is actually a thing that happens. I don't think I ever like conceptualized that it was a thing. Like clearly it is, I guess, but it was just really interesting to watch. And so as he's grown now, he's still doing and still playing sort of all over the map, but uh, he is now in that space. It's just really fascinating to see how it happened or where it came from, and because we didn't allow media that did boys versus girls, which by the way is like a trope in cartoons.
It
If you
is.
didn't know,
Is
it's like the
I've
worst
seen a
shit.
lot of old cartoons.
It's uh,
Yes.
it's a lot to sort of watch, and so what's really sort of weird is like, how did he get to the point where he's like didn't want to be called a girl, and why? I didn't ask him. I didn't want to like psychoanalyze him on the spot, but like, what are the things that made him go down this path, or why, or what parts? And
Yeah.
it's really fascinating. I find the whole thing just fascinating.
Yeah. See, and we're having a conversation about gender issues without it being strange because one person is not one way or the other, because one person is not trans, you know?
Well, I am not. I
Yes.
am whatever the fuck I am, which happens to be, and it's one of the things that makes it. And I'm very aware of it. It's one of the things that makes it difficult. Is I don't like I wear nail polish. I'll wear makeup. I'll do my hair up. I'll dye my hair. I look really. I used to look. Hey, you have kids and your body does what it does. I used to look really fucking good in a dress and a setup. I used to fucking look great. But that like the thing is, and it's some drag queens, and it's the same thing as like in your everyday life, because you just who you are. It's not that you're trying to present, you just happen to be like a big masculine looking dude.
Mm-hmm.
And because of that, it puts you in a really deeply privileged position. Deeply privileged, where it's I go about and no one is going to second guess anything I do or say, and or how I am, or what bathroom I'm going in, and like, but I also get to have the freedom to also play with gender and do all these things because no one's going to say anything. I think the last time someone said something to me was this guy who made a comment about I had this gorgeous pink nail polish on. It was amazing, and he made a F slur comment, and I said, "So just nail polish makes you want to fuck me?" And because I'm giant, he's not going to do anything.
Yeah.
And that position I'm in, I'm aware is very fortunate. Um, I'm aware of it, but again, it's not the defining thing, because ultimately what matters for anyone, and this is the defining thing of what to me makes someone left or right. It's not even your politics. It's, do you allow people to be where they are, and do you
Yes.
validate that?
Yes.
That's it. If you validate where they are, even if you disagree with them, whatever it is, if you validate that and go, I get it, I'm not there, but I get it, I think it puts you in a better spot.
Yes. I do believe in meeting people where they are, sort of the good things as well as the things that you perceive as their flaws, you know? You take them
Mhm.
whole as a person.
Yes.
If that makes sense. Even if like there's a situation in which they themselves perceive that their flaws are such that they're not going to be able to be accepted because of them, or they're not even flaws, they're people that sort of like are very intensely engaged in their chosen lifestyles. They, for example, not always have the time or the energy to sort of engage with other people as much as they'd like to, you know? And
Well, and it surfaces. So for me, a lot of this surfaced early on. I grew up in an area that was deeply religious, deeply white, bougie,
mhm,
and deeply repressive. And my acting out, as my parents would call it, was the goth shit, wearing makeup, wearing fingernail polish, wearing dresses, shit like that. That my parents wrote off as me being sort of active or rebelling or just trying to upset people. And so what you end up with in these situations is why I think I have a lot of empathy for people generally in these repressive places, because the way it's formed and the way it sort of grows is at some point you are socially conditioned to sort of reset and grow up. And as you make that transition, as you go, oh, I need to be professional for this interview. I can't
mhm,
go wearing these things because they won't accept someone like that. And then you start building these little rules, and all these little rules start stanchioning you in, and there's a million of them. And you end up, and I ended up married to someone I didn't love in San Francisco in a job I didn't care for, making decent money, but drinking myself to death, doing
wait,
too many
you're
drugs.
really you're saying that that really happened to you, yes?
Yeah, it's actually my, yeah.
Okay.
And so it's
Did
really
the
just
person love
depressed.
you at
And
least?
uh, we had a deeply fucked up, codependent, negative relationship. Um, it was built out of trauma and sadness, as some things are. What are you going to do?
Mhm.
But the good news is that I did leave her and met my wife, so my current wife, and it was a healthy move. When I made my way to LA, of all the places in the world for me to actually be able to have sort of break free of the old, that depressive, odd, fucked up life, and like get help, to be supported by my new boss in that, and the entire new company, to be whatever I want to be, not
Yeah,
giving a shit. It was really extraordinary to sort of be able to make that shift. I was very
that's a
fortunate, and
big change.
yeah, it was a lot.
But let me like I was thinking of like when people, for example, are very driven, right?
Yes.
Do a lot of things that require their energy, time, their commitment, and they sort of feel like other people around them will not necessarily be um, okay with that. Like, for example, that people will just, um, well, as they get close to the person, will sort of, you know what I mean, yes
Yes,
or
I
no?
do.
Yes,
I
and I
do.
believe that if you sort of like it's a choice that people have to make, right? If it's worth making work being, for example, close to someone like that, no?
It it is, and it's also the person's choice. It's, for me, what I found, and it's um it's one of those things I'm continuously not sure about even how to vocalize, because it's when you are in difficult places, and I was didn't know until years after all this, that I'd gone most of my life unmedicated and had severe uh, mental problems that definitely needed medication.
Yeah.
Um, when you're in that place, the wall of constant change feels like a nightmare, and you're kind of, everything feels like this bubbling cauldron. And so when you have anyone, even someone who is unhealthy, that feels like a stability, and this is what kind of my parents were for me, and so it transferred into an unhealthy relationship perfectly. But then when I found someone that's what my current wife Heather, what she did is she kind of gave me room to not have stability. And it's a thing that I had already sort of explored and really wanted to believe in, but didn't have the room myself to sort of allow that.
Mm-hmm.
Because again, you build walls for yourself more often.
Yeah.
And I hit a weird place where it was kind of like, uh, just it sort of, I let it all go. And it, because I was like, there's no point. It was almost like a ego suicide of sorts. It was very odd. And that sort of leading into therapy, leading into the other kinds of self care, and being able to have a clean break and just like eliminate all of my old friends, all of my old shit. Uh, I went no contact with family for a while. Like, you got to just break free.
Yeah.
And reset into someone that I was more happy with. And it's been a long journey. Long journey of 16 years.
But I assume it's a very, how should I put it? It's the word
Still
I'm
long,
looking for. Oh,
still
not
long, but
long.
it
What I'm looking more for is like it's a
worth it.
journey that's, yes, basically like that's, it's worthwhile, you know.
Yes.
We only live once, so we have to sort
Yes.
of make the best of it, and that's also why we have to meet people where they are, right? Because we
Always.
all,
Because everyone gets that chance and it's one of those things that I think it's why I've always been fascinated to my last video I did a little thing on Mud Fossil University. I've been a subscriber to Mud Fossil University for years. It's this guy who believes that if you look at like rock formations, that you can see dragons and blood and proof that giants lived, like crazy shit. And I've always found it fascinating because he's not like what you would traditionally call like a loon. He's well thought out and he's considered. And I think when you look at him and how he talks about it and how he sees what he sees, it's to me important to take him at face value and see it where it's at,
yeah,
and then do the same also with the Trump supporting cis racist. Not justifying him. People can be bad at being people, just like I'm a
we
bad
can understand
hockey.
someone without necessarily endorsing or agreeing everything.
Yeah, I mean, like I can tell you about hockey. I wouldn't play it because I don't know how to ice skate. It doesn't mean that I'm a bad person. I'm a bad ice skater. Other people are bad at other things, like being a person, which is fine. But where they're at and what they're saying is coming from their position, and their position, even if it's cynical, is their position. Because if you're able to understand where they're coming from, then it's much easier to sort of, and again, not where they're coming from in terms of what they believe and giving belief justification, not that, but
Yeah,
that what they're saying is what they're saying, and that they wholeheartedly believe what they're saying. Then you can start to trace back and understand what they're invested in emotionally, what socially they're interested in, where they believe
yeah.
their place is in society.
Of course,
And
sometimes those things do not necessarily correspond to what they project
oh, it
publicly,
never does.
right?
Never does. Oh dear Lord. That's Ted Haggart. I grew up in Colorado, and so Ted Haggart had a focus on the family who was outed for having a multi-year affair with a gay prostitute he would do meth with in a hotel. I have Ted Haggart's autobiography signed by the prostitute. Dude's really cool, by the way. He wrote his own book, and I was like, dude, can you sign Ted Haggart's? He thought it was the funniest fucking thing ever. My parents got that for me. It was very nice.
Interesting.
But both of those people, that Ted Haggart and where he's coming from, and also the gay prostitute, both of them are also people, and where they're
Yeah.
coming from and and the repression they're experiencing is what it is. And we all experience some level of it, some of us much more acutely than others. Some of us to the point where we express it and enforce it in other people, trying to keep them also repressed.
Yeah.
Because there's nothing helps impotence better than other people being impotent.
And there's also the very fact that when we sort of build relations with people, whatever their nature, friendship, family relations, intimate relations, right? To all sorts of relations, it's sort of like
So
you
complicated.
have your life, they have their life, and it's about sort of mutual participation in that. But you cannot really participate in a different person's life if you cannot see them completely as they are, not as you want them to be, if that makes sense.
Yes. And again, the want them to be is the thrust because, and again, to take it back to what we were talking about with the categorization, when I read someone's categories online before I talk to them, their gender pronouns, their race, their political views, all those things you learn in someone's Discord profile these days, or in the groups that they're in, or anything. You learn all of these steps. Then what we do as people is we coalesce those things, and it's where our desire believes and places them. All of those things and mishmashed in very particular sets. So they are a racist. They are a proper
Interesting.
lefty. They are this or that. And so when we've created a category for a person, we've created an individual category for them ultimately. But we've seen those categories and created it from our position of what those things mean, which is never anyone else's fucking position, like
Right.
by definition. So, like, we start on the wrong foot in every conversation we have.
I guess, but there is then to us to explore more, right? Even if we don't start
Absolutely.
at the perfect food. So I guess I'll ask you
All right.
this, right?
You have 2 minutes left. I've got to run. I've got a
All
work
right.
meeting.
I'll ask you
Um,
this, like in these 2 minutes. When you look at
Let's
me,
do
when
it.
you interact with me, are there any categories that come to mind?
No, I don't do that. I try my best, and it's a thing that takes a lot of work, meditation, and practice. But I don't like do that as a thing. The closest I would come is the accent, because
Accent?
well, it's you're not American.
No.
Um,
I do have
um,
relatives in America.
no, and you're kind of quiet, soft spoken. I guess would be the closest. Like, um, I don't really consider things like that in the same way, because I kind of have I don't know, maybe utopianist side to me in some capacity where like the position eventually we can be in is that we're just allowed to be.
Hmm.
And
So would you
right
be able to
now,
characterize my political leanings? I guess.
oh no, no,
Oh,
because
yes.
they tend towards the revolutionary lefty side of things. That would be the closest I'd come. I don't know the vast majority of your. Do we want to talk about where do you stand on gun rights? Where is your stance on derivatives markets or how capitalism functions inside? Like,
Hmm.
there's a billion other things.
Exactly. All the things that we could do in our next meetings. Even though today was supposed to be about horror, but things happen and goals
No, this was a
shift.
good. This was fun. This was fun. So okay, here's what we are. I'm going to say. Our next conversation, we can do it. We can make this a weekly thing if you want. This will be fun.
Okay.
But let's make the next one. I'm going to bring a couple games that are really weird, and we're gonna talk through them.
All right.
Weird,
But
not
I
even
have to
necessarily
play.
horror.
I have to play
Weird.
for them, right? For me to
Uh,
be able to talk about them.
yeah, probably.
So you could send me the titles and then I could play through them and we could discuss
All right,
them.
I'll have you add me on Steam. We'll figure it out.
All right.
All right,
Nice.
excellent. You enjoy.
Okay. So I guess
All
this
right, I'll
is
talk to you soon.
farewell. All right.
It is farewell for the day, but we will talk again soon enough.
All right. Then I will
All
go
right.
to the
Take
toilet.
care of yourself, Lucy.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.
And that was that.